And welcome back to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I'm doing westerns, two of the great westerns from the 1950s. So let's get started. The 1950s was the peak decade for American westerns. After World War II, some movie audiences were looking for escapist adventure cinema that was a bit distanced from the previous decade's global unpleasantness. They wanted heroes, but not in khaki uniforms. There were many exceptions to this, but crime and westerns were the genres where questions could be asked and complex answers delivered. But American cinema doubled down on westerns, which was a genre that had existed since the birth of cinema. Hollywood strip-mined and simplified US history of 70 years before, and you've got to remember, the so-called Wild West was still within living memory at the time they made these movies. Only just, but still in living memory. But even popular cinema serves other functions than just entertainment. Westerns could be about many things: juvenile delinquency, sexual jealousy, a revenge tale with its roots in misguided male pride, racism, colonization, and even subconscious lesbian lust. In an era where the American film industry was known for moral panics and political purges, westerns in some instances showed a complexity that resonates well with the better angels of our 21st century world. In the first of these two films, a tight-ass law officer, a kid, a drug addict, and a man with a disability go up against unchecked wealth and privilege. And in the second one, a dying man helps a marshal and his brothers save a town from a different rich asshole. So let's talk about Rio Bravo and Gunfight at the OK Corral. Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo was his reaction to High Noon, the 1952 movie where Gary Cooper's Sheriff Will Kane tries to get townspeople to help him deal with three gunslingers who are coming to town to kill him, and in the end Grace Kelly helps him kill the last of the bad guys. Howard Hawks hated this, and I can kind of understand why. Marshal Will Kane in High Noon was a dangerous idiot. Amateur shopkeepers going up against professional gunslingers would be a recipe for a bloodbath. It would be like modern day cops recruiting minimum wage convenience store clerks to deal with outlaw motorcycle gangs. Hawks flipped that idea, and he gives us flawed but skilled professionals going up against an army of gunmen hired by Nathan Burdett, played by John Russell, who was later the lawman in a short-run TV series. Burdett wants to break his arsehole brother Joe, played by Claude Akins, out of prison after Joe murders a man in a saloon in town. By the way, the guy he murders in that scene is played by Bing Russell, the father of Kurt Russell. That scene's right at the start of the film, and it plays without dialogue right up until the end. And yet it tells us a lot about John T. Chance, the John Wayne character, Dude, played by Dean Martin, and Joe Burdett, in a skillfully written and really well-directed scene. One of the screenwriters for Rio Bravo was Lee Brackett, a woman who may well be the secret source here. Brackett wrote crime, science fiction, and westerns, and was well respected in all three genres. Admittedly, she did slump it later in her career by working for George Lucas, but I'm digressing. Up against Burdett, we've got John T. Chance, played by John Wayne, Colorado, played by Ricky Nelson, Dude, played by Dean Martin, and Stumpy, played by Walter Brennan with his teeth out. We also get a love interest for John T. Chance in Angie Dickinson's Feathers, a professional gambler wandering from town to town. Now, Chance is a tight-ass lawman who thinks he knows everything until Feathers disabuses him of that notion. Dude, which is one of Dean Martin's best roles, is a former deputy who's fallen into a bottle, and I love the way he has a really nuanced redemption arc, where he does screw up between moments of competence while he is dealing with alcoholic withdrawal, until he doesn't screw up. Colorado, played by Ricky Nelson, is a smart kid and a skilled gunslinger, and he shows a wisdom and caution beyond his years. Walter Brennan's Stumpy is a disabled old codger who runs the jail. Stumpy was ripped off by Burdett, who took his land, and so he has a grudge. Angie Dickinson's Feathers is the kind of strong woman you get in Howard Hawks movies. She stands on her own feet, she makes her own way in the world, and she owns her own sexuality. She doesn't have a facade of confidence, she has genuine confidence that challenges and startles John T. Chance. John Wayne has never been as vulnerable and wrong-footed in another movie as he is in Rio Bravo. In a couple of his later films, they tried to re-spark that side of his persona, but it never quite succeeded. The small-town world created in Rio Bravo is deeply textured. The local hotel is run by a Mexican man and his wife, Carlos and Consuela, and even though the characters are played comedically, they do have a little complexity and an inner life that makes him 100% better than most of the portrayals of ethnic minorities in other movies of the time. The local Undertaker is Chinese, and all three of these non-white characters are treated with respect. Like Gunfight at the OK Corral, Rio Bravo rewards careful viewing. Howard Hawks' framing and blocking of the scenes are superb. We know the layout of the town in granular detail. By the time the climactic action happens, we know where Bedette's saloon is and where the other saloon in town is. We know where the hotel and the Undertaker are in relation to the jail. We know where Pat Wheeler's freight wagons are parked on the edge of town because they're full of fuel, oil and dynamite. By the way, Pat Wheeler is played by Ward Bond. And we know where Dude is positioned at the end of town to make sure nobody enters the town with a gun. This map makes the action set pieces a lot stronger, because when shit goes down, as audience members we can focus on the characters and their actions without filling our brains with distracting unanswered questions about the locations. Because we like the characters, we cheer when they think their way to victory as much as they do shoot the baddies. The good guys have to be strategic because they are outnumbered. The use of music here is interesting too. Like Gunfight at the OK Corral, the main themes were composed by Dmitri Tiomkin, and they're bombastic and over the top and wonderful for that. But you get a lot of diegetic music as well. You get the Deguelo, played by a Mexican band in Bedette's saloon, which reminds the heroes that the Mexican army also played the Cutthroat song at the Alamo. And we all know how that ended. In the jail, we get Dude singing My Rifle, My Pony and Me, almost as a way of the character self-soothing and healing himself from his alcoholic withdrawal. This starts a sing-along in the jail, which builds the camaraderie between the protagonists. And at the end of the movie, we get Dean Martin singing a few bars of the song Rio Bravo over the titles. Rio Bravo is one of the great action westerns of the 1950s, but it sends a different message to a modern audience than it did to those who watched it during the Eisenhower administration. More about that later. John Sturgis's Gunfight at the OK Corral, made a year after his modern noir western Bad Day at Black Rock, gives us lawmen as mythic heroes. The Earps and Doc Holliday are presented as flawed, reluctant protagonists, but the movie makes them much larger than that. At the start we get Frankie Lane's iconic theme song, which continues with explanatory verses throughout the movie. And that kind of makes Frankie Lane like a bard, singing about legendary demigods. Having Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday played by larger-than-life actors Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas enhances the Olympian status of these heroes. The supporting cast here is truly epic. There's not a western beside possibly The Magnificent Seven, also directed by John Sturges, with so many iconic and superb actors. We get some really fine character actors like Frank Phelan, who plays the corrupt Sheriff Cotton Wilson, and familiar faces like Lyle Becker playing Ike Clanton and Earl Holliman, and Lee Van Cleef and Jack Elam and Martin Milner, Dennis Hopper, Whit Bissell, Kenneth Tobey, and you also get DeForest Kelley from Star Trek playing Morgan Earp. On the other side of the sheet you get Jo Van Fleet as Kate, the woman with whom Doc Holliday has a fraught and almost sadomasochistic relationship.
You don't stand a chance, Doc. Bailey brought 2 men with him. Oh, come on, honey, let's cut out of here while there's still time. The whole town, including that no-good marshal, is laying for you.
And she is really good too. Jo Van Fleet was a method actor, trained in the Actors Studio, and she has never been bad in a movie. You should check her out as the mother of the James Dean character in East of Eden. She is superb in that. The other main female cast member is Rhonda Fleming as Laura Dembo, a female gambler with whom Wyatt Earp starts a relationship. And she's less well served by the script. She might well be seen as almost a first draft of Angie Dickinson's Feathers in Rio Bravo. And nobody did widescreen action as panoramically beautiful in the 1950s as John Sturges. You can compare and contrast Hawks Town in Rio Bravo with Tombstone as seen in Gunfight at the OK Corral, mostly because they used the same location, Old Tucson in Arizona. Hawks is great, but the climax of Gunfight at the OK Corral is much more dynamic than the one in Rio Bravo. It starts with this truly wonderful diving role by Burt Lancaster, who you remember was a circus acrobat in his earlier days. And yet during that climactic fight, Sturgis, while using the wide landscape, still gives us claustrophobic moments as the antagonists battle in the weather-worn adobe walls and dusty dry creek beds of the OK Corral. The claustrophobia comes from the heroes being pinned down by the Clantons and their men. And yes, I know the gunfight takes 5 minutes when the real-life one was over in 34 seconds, but I like it. It's not realistic, and movies like Hour of the Gun gave us a more grounded version of this historic event. But it has an epicness that I'm always up for. Kirk Douglas was slightly miscast as Doc Holliday. Having so energetic an actor playing a dentist dying of tuberculosis was a bold move, but in most of the scenes he sells it well. Burt Lancaster doesn't go far out of his comfort zone as Wyatt Earp, though he does give the character a world weariness and a caution that deepens the portrayal beyond the usual thing you would have got with many other actors. But both of these movies have underlying themes that play well in the modern times. In both of these movies, the chief bad guys are wealthy men. And if recent history has told us anything, it's that rich arseholes are the cause of all the problems in the world. In these movies, local oligarchs use their money to control, terrify and repress other people and to defy the rule of law. Both Burdett and Ike Clanton have weak brothers, though Claude Aiken's Joe is a thick, blunt instrument, while Billy Clanton, played by Dennis Hopper, is a reluctant gunslinger who ultimately yields to his own idiotic fatalism. Both movies are about the rule of law and the ideal that civilization is based on respect for the community by those who enforce those laws. As Cotton Wilson shows in Gunfight at the OK Corral, it's easy for an aging law officer who's underpaid to follow the money and be corrupted. He's the dark future that Wyatt Earp fears. There's much more than simplistic good versus evil morality in these movies. That nuance is why we're still watching them more than 60 years later. The heroes are troubled, but yet they get the job done. Some plot themes have no use-by date. They're applicable wherever people gather and build their futures, and they are what so many of our modern arguments are essentially about. The idea that there's a secular moral compass we could and should follow is a concept that isn't going away. These movies tell us that, difficult though it is, we should strive to be our best selves, and I love them for that. So that's it for this time around. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and leave a comment. You can also support the channel by donating at patreon.com/paleocinema. Next up, I'm doing some monster movies, but I'm going to try to find different ones because in October, YouTube is flooded with monster movies, and I've got to try to differentiate just that little bit. Anyway, in the meantime, look after yourselves. Watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Throw a Western disc into your player and have a bit of fun with it. And I'll catch you next time.